I'm going to be talking today about a bit of research that I'm doing that relates to body image. I think it relates to body image, but it comes possibly a little bit out of left field, insofar as I'm not going to be talking about some of the sort of more common things that we think about when we think about body image. And I also will be talking about issues that relate quite a bit to boys and their body confidence. So we don't have many boys here today. We have some grown-up boys. So I should just say, to say something about myself, I've been now in the UK for about 10 or 11 years, but I got my PhD in the States. So I'm really aware of some differences between, UK body image and US body image, particularly as it relates to young girls and women. So I'd be very interested to talk to you about that if you want to afterwards. Okay, so when I think about body confidence, I think it relates to, can you guys see, to these factors. Trust, about engagement with your body, so trusting your body, being able to engage with your body, knowing something about how your body works, and about being able to control your body. And most of the work that I do relates to this issue of, can you control your body? Can you control what your body is doing at particular times? So the thing is that some young people, some of you in this room, may have less control over certain kinds of behaviors than you'd like to have, right? And what I found when I go and talk to young people about this is that not having control over what your body is doing, not able to control your impulses, creates a real crisis of body confidence. So you might all be thinking, well, what does that look like? What is a body that isn't in control? So in the neuroscience of self-control, which is an area that I work in, we think about self-control as something that is regulated in part by processes in your brain. So we have children, for example, who can't control very well when they daydream. Can you focus when you want to? Can you focus on what your teacher's saying? Can you focus on what I'm saying? Or does your mind sort of start to wander in ways that, most people's minds wander, but lots of people who have real control issues with daydreaming can't bring themselves back when they want to or when they really have to focus. The same is true for aggression and hyperactivity. So you have some young boys in particular, but also young girls, who have real difficulties controlling their aggressive behavior. It's like they go blind. They talk about feeling like their bodies are going to explode, that they're so hot that they just have to release this aggression. And they're not able to take the time to think before they act, right? And many of you probably can think about kids in your school who seem to not be able to think before they act, and they get in trouble a lot. Sometimes other kids like to wind them up to see them lose control. So this is a condition that is sometimes associated with the term attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Being able to control how much you eat and what you see in the mirror when you look at yourself. So this cartoon down here relates to eating disorders, anorexia nervosa, bulimia. So this is something, as you probably know, that affects young women. But these young women feel sometimes that they have to control their behavior around food. But they also have this strange perceptual disorder where they actually look in the mirror and see themselves as heavier than they are. And obesity, of course, is kind of a new issue that we're concerned about. And this is about a lack of control over eating. So for people who have some of these conditions, their bodies feel like they're their enemy. Or their bodies can feel like they want to exercise control over that body. And self-harm, I don't know if you can see this, this sort of cutting yourself, is sometimes a way for young people to exercise control over their bodies in an effort to control their worlds. So I also want to say that bodies are also a site of creative expression, right? This is Lady Gaga in her meat suit. So, you know, we have to remember that bodies are there to foster creative self-expression, and that can be a really healthy thing. I'm not making any comments about Lady Gaga's personal state of health or illness. I don't know, but you know, she does remind us, as does Katy Perry and, you know, these pop stars, these women who have taken to wearing these flamboyant outfits and, in a sense, you know, putting their bodies on display, that there is room for creative expression. So, and a lot of the conditions that I'm going to be talking about are controversial because people don't know, for example, you know, when a young boy is hyperactive or aggressive, is that because he's just being a boy, or is that because he has a real problem regulating his behavior? So this line between what's healthy and what's destructive, what's normal and what's pathological, is a fuzzy line. And we always have to remember that there are no good, hard and fast facts. So neuroscientists have been trying to understand the role of the brain in controlling behaviors. And this is a really exciting area of neuroscience research. And those of us who look at it from the perspective of ethics, which is what I do, are both fascinated and worried at the same time, because there's a lot of wonderful research happening in neuroscience on our abilities to control our behaviors and what our bodies are doing. But on the other hand, if you think it's something in your brain, well, then you might not be as aware of the environmental influences that can shape certain kinds of negative behaviors. So, you know, I'll talk in a moment about research that is looking at eating disorders on the level of the brain. So do young people who have eating disorders have something wrong with how their brain works? And if they do, well, then are we going to ignore all of the negative stuff that happens in the social world that also impacts how young people manage their relationship with food? So let me take that example a little bit more specifically. So the neuroscience of eating disorders is beginning to look at whether young people with anorexia have this perceptual problem. And so that's one area of research. You know, why is it that young people with eating disorders look in the mirror and actually see someone who is fat when they're actually not fat at all? So some people have talked about this in relation to delusions. Well, maybe they're having delusions. And other people look at it more in relation to, you know, those figure ground pictures that you can look at. So what do you see? What's the first thing that you focus on when you look at yourself in the mirror? And how does that perceptual process work? Other people are looking at the behaviors around food in eating disordered patients in relation to the neuroscience of anxiety. So all of this seems to indicate that the small region of the brain called the amygdala is somehow not working properly in young people with eating disorders. So that's one example. Another example is the neuroscience of hyperactivity and impulse control. So kids who can't regulate their behavior, so they're always flapping around, they're getting up and down, they're bouncing off the walls, or they're being aggressive, and very angry, may have some difficulties in their brains with dopamine regulation. Now, you don't have to worry about the sort of specific names of any of this. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter. It's one of many, many neurotransmitters in your brain that regulates functions. In addition, genetic links to these kinds of behaviors have been confirmed. And if you do brain scans of kids who have ADHD, you begin to see some very broad differences. And interestingly, the same disorders in the brain that seem to be associated with hyperactive and impulsive behaviors seem also to be associated with having obesity. So the idea is that that same lack of impulse control can happen around food as well. So one thing that I'm very interested in is what impact does this kind of neuroscience of the unruly body have on young people? So earlier I said that I thought body confidence was about trusting your body, being engaged with your body, having knowledge about your body, and having control over your body. So the question is really, if you are somebody who has difficulties controlling your body, if you are overweight because you have difficulty controlling food, or you're underweight because you're obsessed with controlling your food, or you have difficulty controlling when you get into fights with your mates at school, once you know that some of this is associated with disorders in the brain, do you begin to blame your brain rather than blaming yourself? Right? You say, oh, well, you know what? I'm obese because my brain's impulse control mechanisms aren't working properly. You know, do you go around thinking that? So that's I'm interested in this kind of research because I think it has real implications for how much of what I think of as a brain-centered mode of imagining our bodies we go about with. And I don't think actually it's very good to be thinking, oh, my brain made me do it. Because I think we can all be more responsible for our behaviors. And we wouldn't want to abdicate, give over responsibility to our brains, even if our brains are involved in shaping our behaviors. So I do work with neuroscientists and with geneticists who are doing, this is a brain scan, a functional magnetic resonance imaging scan. Have any of you had a brain scan before? No, good, that's good. So this is a child going into an fMRI machine, and this is a picture of a bit of a gene. So the question is, how much do these kind of bits of neuroscientific and genetic data have to do with our capacity to control what our bodies are doing? So these are projects that I'm interested in and working with. We're working with a group of people at the University of Oslo looking at the fMRI of anorexia nervosa. And all through London, we have people who are working on looking at biomarkers, just means how the biology of your body is associated with outcomes of hyperactivity and obesity. And I should say, the interesting thing here is that once you begin to think, well, my brain is involved in how I behave and the kinds of things that my body is doing and my ability to control what my body is doing, then one of the dangers is that you begin to think, well, my brain can be responsible for anything. So we're looking, for example, at the degree to which problems in brain regulation and dysfunctions in the genetic coding is associated with criminal behaviors. And we're beginning to look at 6 and 7 and 8-year-old children and trying to predict on the basis of what their brains look like whether they will have adult careers in criminality. So you should all be a little bit worried about that because that's going too far over to the side of relying on neuroscience and genetics to tell us about how young people behave and what their bodies are going to do and their capacity to control their bodies. But one thing I'd be interested in hearing you guys talk about is whether or not this kind of research or hearing about that your brain might be involved in eating disorders or obesity or hyperactive behaviors changes your attitude to yourself. Does it increase your confidence in your body, for example, to think that the way your body is entirely your fault? It's not something only you are doing, that some of it might be, quote unquote, hardwired. How does it affect your motivation to change things for yourself? And if you are somebody who's got a diagnosed mental disorder, do you want to take your medication if you think that your brain is part of the problem of how you behave? Are you more likely to want to take your medication? Or do you think, well, if it's a problem in my brain, I can't really fix it, so I'm not going to take my medication? So these are the kinds of issues that we're looking at in research in this area. Okay, so that's all from me. That was a quick course in the neuroscience of self-control and unruly bodies. Thank you.